promise you with all my heart that after following this free course, you will improve all your renders immediately. I know it's a big claim, but I'm convinced that this is the single best free lighting course for 3D artists on the entire internet. And if you follow through, you will be a better artist in less than 1 hour of your time. I think lighting itself in general is quite underappreciated. People simply just play some lights and hope for the best. And I don't think there are many dedicated tutorials for this, because most of the time lighting is being treated as an afterthought. You can go to this timestamp right here in order to start straight away, or you can watch the next part where I'm going to explain the entire structure of this free course, so you can select specifically what you think interests you. So the way this course is structured is as follows. The first video is a physics video and gives you a general understanding of how lighting actually works. If you're not up to this, no problem. Simply watch the one after that, the 10 laws of cinematic lighting. That takes about 6 minutes and gives you a great basis for cinematography in general. In the video after that, we are going over every single lighting tool in Blender that exists. I think it's very helpful to know even what exists, so that once you run into a problem, you can always find the solution because you know there is a solution. In the part after that, you'll learn everything about lighting in Blender, showing practical setups, common problems with certain materials, and high-level methods to solve those issues. And the video after that, to me, is very important because then we're going over 33 photorealism techniques that will improve your renders by a lot. The video after that is a very short one, I think 1 or 2 minutes, and I'm going to show you a node that will instantly improve your renders in DaVinci Resolve, and it really takes a couple of seconds. And then the final video, full transparency, is an advertisement for the King of Light bundle pack. And you can skip that video if you want, but I would really appreciate it if you check it out. So if you're only interested in one of those parts, simply skip ahead to that video and watch that part. Otherwise, let's get started straight away. Ever wondered why your renders look flat and lifeless despite using high quality models? Ever wondered why higher quality textures didn't make your render better as you expected? And what it all comes down to one simple discipline: lighting. It's true, lighting can make the shittiest of models look like a cinematic masterpiece, but it can make the best of models look like utter crap. But here's the real question: do you actually know how lighting works, or are you simply changing sliders and values? Are you just a lucky gambler? Or are you an expert? Alright guys, I can't keep this up. Let's talk about the actual physics in Blender. We are working on the inverse square law. The inverse square law states that a physical quantity decreases in proportion to the square of the distance from the source. Which means that if you move double the distance, you need 4 times the power. And I will demonstrate this right now. This quite simply means that if I'm talking into the camera right now and double the distance, the amount of sound will be 4 times less powerful. Now that we already know a lot more about physics, let's go ahead and look at glass and the index of refraction. As we all know, when light travels in different mediums, its speed changes. So in vacuum, the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second, while in water it is 225,000 kilometers per second. The higher the index of refraction, the slower the light moves through it. And you might be asking, isn't light a constant? And you are correct. So because of the material and the way it interacts with the light, there is a phase offset of the wavelengths of the light, which makes it appear as if it is slower. So that's actually the way it works. The speed of light is always constant. Now the ratio between the speeds of light in different media are called the index of refraction. So if we actually take the speed of light in vacuum, which is 300,000 kilometers per second, and divide it by the speed of light in water, which is 225,000 kilometers per second, then we actually get the result 1.33. And if we then take a look at the holy internet for our verification, then indeed the index of refraction is 1.33. This change in speed is what causes the light to change direction, which is why we get those weird looking reflections when shining a light through glass, for example. So right here I have a drawing of a green arrow on a red background, and I'm going to place the glass in front. We can see some displacement going on already, but this is not the final magic trick, because I'm going to pour this glass full of water. And watch what happens when we do that. There you go. We all know this revolutionary node right here. It turns objects metallic, it makes them more rough, it makes them transmissive. It can do quite a lot. But what even is a principled bidirectional scattering distribution function? Well, you're about to find out. But before we dive deep, let's first understand that light and materials cannot be separated. I mean, would you have guessed that this object is actually orange? The lighting and the material need to work together in order to reach some sort of unity. Now let's find out what the difference is between specularity and roughness. Specular comes from the Latin term speculum, which means mirror. When we increase the specularity, we're actually changing the material in order to behave more like a mirror. But why, when we drag this slider, it is not becoming reflective like the roughness does? That's a very interesting question. And before we can answer that question, we must first know what roughness is. So roughness is basically the amount of scattering that occurs when a light hits a material. So basically, when you have an object and light is hitting the material, it can scatter in all types of directions, which means that the material is quite diffuse. However, if you have lighting and it reaches the material and it bounces off straight, then it's probably very reflective, which means that you have a low roughness and there's less scattering going on. And now we have subsurface scattering, which is another form of scattering. So subsurface scattering is actually when light passes through a material instead of bouncing off of it, and within that material scatters and returns light back out. Sub, of course, comes from Latin as well, which means beneath or under. So it's scattering under the surface. Remember when you were young and shining the light through your earlobe and then it becomes all red, or through your fingers? That's basically subsurface scattering. I could go deeper into all other principal BSDF properties, but I don't think it's suitable for this video to really turn it into hours long. So I'm simply going to give you 6 more summarized points of the things that the principal BSDF can do and how it works physically. Transmission is not actually glass and increases render times more than the glass BSDF. Coat is an extra layer of paint often used on cars to protect the original material, but it looks kind of roughnessy, so it reflects some lighting. By manipulating the anisotropy in the specular, you can twist reflections, which can be quite cool, for example for brushed metals. Anisotropic means not having the same properties in all directions. Sheen basically means shine, and it's mainly used for fuzzy materials that glow a bit, such as fabric textures like velvet, or hair. It can also be used to fake rim lights, but I recommend just using lights for that. Thin film is a rather new feature in Blender's principal BSDF shader that simulates the interference effects seen in thin layers of materials such as soap, bubbles, oil, and stuff like that. In the next video we are going to discover the laws of cinematic lighting. It's going to be very interesting. Subscribe and click right here to watch the next video. Have you ever wondered why this shot feels like your grandma just bought a new iPhone? Well, this shot feels like absolute cinema. In this video you'll learn the 10 laws all movies use in order to create beautiful cinematic shots and manipulate your emotions. If you master these laws, all your designs will improve tremendously, making you look like a pro. But if you ignore them, well, even AI will refuse to generate images that were trained on your model. Oh, and stick around because number 5 is the greatest lighting hack you'll ever learn, and number 8 is the worst one that everybody hates but still gets used to this day. Warning, this video might change the way you see movies and shows forever, and I'm not accountable for any induced depression, damnation or despair. There's a secret color technique Hollywood uses to create an aesthetic shot 100% of the time. Nobody knows why it works, but it does. Can you already see what it is? I use my programming skills to determine the color variation in this shot. Primary color that takes up about 60%, then you want a secondary color that takes up about 30%, a cherry on top color that takes around 10%. Now watch what happens when we distort the balance. It's kind of like a disordered class set that brings a lot of chaos, but people actually like order and explanations, which is where the next technique shines. Do you feel a sense of unease when you look at this shot? Well, so do I. What people like to see is motivated lighting. This means that it simply makes sense that a subject is lit in a certain way. In order to achieve that, there's a very simple trick. My face on this side is lit by a professional light, but by adding a practical light in the background, it gives motivation as to where the light is coming from. It makes the shot feel more natural. But the next part is one of the most underutilized lighting techniques. There's no reason to run away from this lighting trick, even though it's a bit scarier and a bit harder to accomplish. It's called dynamic lighting. Under this technique fall moving lights, flickering lights, and changing colors. But if you really want to add some extra oomph in your lighting, you might be interested in Hollywood's secret sauce. And no, it's not an overpowered female, adrenochrome, or a complete lack of creativity. It's actually something way deeper than that. If you have a very flat looking scene, the best way to overcome that is to add some good old fog. Since the fog gets denser, the further away the camera is, the more depth it will create in your scene. The good part about fog, which are actually little water particles, is that light interacts with it, causing us to see lighting more directly. So if you want to add some subtle depth to your scene, use fog. However, the next one is one of my favorite lighting tricks of all time. Lighting is not only light, it's also shadow, creating interesting patterns that are visually pleasing to look at. Gobos are a cheap way to act as if lighting is being blocked by objects that don't actually exist. This is especially helpful in Blender since more objects cost more computation power, which increases your render times. For an example of a real-life gobo, you can see in the back right there's a shadow pattern on the wall. If you're interested, I've built an entire gobo pack with 365 gobos that integrates seamlessly with Blender's asset browser. It's also part of the King of Light bundle pack, which is the all-in-one lighting solution for Blender. This basically allows you to go to war with high-level mecha suits, atomic rockets versus people who use sticks and silly putty. So check out the link in the description. However, you also want to stick around for the next one because this is one of the lighting fundamentals everybody in lighting needs to know. If you can't see it yet or haven't seen it during this entire presentation, it's time to buckle up. First, we place a strong light at a 45-degree angle from the subject. Then we place a soft light on a 45-degree angle on the other side. You can move it at a further distance or make sure that the light source is a lot bigger, which makes the light softer. This fills in shadows in the face or any part that is underlit. Finally, you want to separate the foreground from the background using a rim light. So the rim light's making sure that the foreground element is being separated from the background, otherwise everything will be squished together and it makes the image look flat. This setup is called the 3-point lighting setup. It is one of the fundamental lighting setups everybody who works in design should know. If you want to have a little bit more than a TPL, then this next technique is for you. Sometimes you need those extra touches in your light just to make the scene 1% better. Can you see the difference between this shot and this shot? Pretty interesting, right? Well, I like this one better. The reason for this is that my hair shines a bit more, invoking youthfulness and an eternal shine that radiates my beautiful lion manes, exuding power and evolutionary supremacy over the mortals of this earth. I mean, it creates some cool lighting on the top. Speaking of top, let's also talk about the bottom, because the next lighting trick is as much loved as it is hated by self-proclaimed cinema experts. Let's check it out. Why did everybody hate how dark this movie was, but loved how dark this movie was?
You merely adopted the dark.
There's a great discussion going on where some people are absolutely hating the fact that there's too much darkness being used in movies, while the opposite side says that it creates depth and mood. Using darkness definitely helps with conveying emotions. It would be hard to have a serious Batman movie where everybody is running around in pink tutus and a gleeful and joyful experience with a glowing shine all over the screen. On the other hand, it would feel out of place to light Barbie as if she's an underground billionaire living in the cave. What do you think? Is the darkness gaining too much power, or is it a necessary evil to create an experience better light? Let everybody know your highly validated and cultured opinion in the comments, and let's go over to the next cool lighting trick. Remember when you used to squeeze your eyes towards the light and you would get all these beams and rays? Well, it's in your favorite movies now too. As a matter of fact, since the advent of CGI, it's kind of mandatory. Lens flares and glows are an easy way to incorporate CG elements back into the scene, because the glow is going over the foreground and the background elements, making it seem as if everything is happening in a coherent space. Which is also why most CG scenes do this meme. I personally like the way they look, and when I'm out filming and I happen to catch one in my lens, I'm like, yeah, this is cool, this is special, let's keep it in. And the next lighting trick will make you stay hard. Now, there's a pretty big difference between hard lights and soft lights. Hard lights, like the sun, give a pretty harsh shadow on your face, for example. But soft lights give this glowy look that makes it look really cinematic. Most people prefer soft lights, since it gives a greater control over the shadows and makes it more gradient. A lot of indie filmmakers actually like filming when it's cloudy outside, because the clouds act as some sort of diffusion for the sun that makes the light a lot more soft. Of course, golden hour, which does have the sun directly shining, is also a very good option. Now that we've reached the end, I will give you 2 more bonus tips in 30 seconds. Add water to the ground for more intricate reflections. This always looks cool and makes it less flat. From orange to teal, from dark to light, from soft shadows to hard shadows, usually it comes down to one principle, and that is contrast. You want to create visual depth by contrasting different elements with each other. Good luck, check out the King of Light bundle pack for the all-in-one lighting solution in Blender, and click on this video next to learn everything about Blender's lighting tools. There are 4 actual lights in Blender: area lights, spotlights, point lights, and the sun. All of these have a power button to change the light power. In area lights you can change the shape, square, rectangle, disc, or ellipse. You can change the size right here. For spotlights you can change the size under beam shape. Cast shadow makes sure that the light that you're shining is also able to cast shadows. Multiple importance is something we never touch, neither do the developers of Blender, so just leave it on at all times. Now for shadow caustics we actually need a material with some glass. This is what the shadow looks like right now, but if we enable shadow caustics on this light, you'll be able to see that the glass is handling this a lot better. The setup in order to get this to work is to select this material, go over here and set it to cast shadow caustics. Do the same for the floor but set it to receive shadow caustics. Go to the world properties, go to the settings, go to surface and then turn on shadow caustics. Spread determines how hard or soft the light is, so if we decrease this number, you can see it's actually turning into a square. But as we bring this upwards, it is becoming softer and softer from its emission point, which is the light itself. And now we can see that it's spanning the entire 180 degrees. And the less degrees we do, the more focused the light will become and the sharper it will get. Now if we want to change the temperature, all we have to do is click on Use Nodes, click on this yellow button, go to Black Body and change the temperature. Now the spotlight can also increase the radius, which will make it a lot more soft. But if you simply want to soften or feather the edges, you can increase the blend. Now, if you have a window for architectural renders, for example, you can place an area light right here to shine through the window. And once you click on Portal, the light itself will be removed, but the calculation of all the other lights coming through the window will be faster and generate less noise. Now, let's say you make an animation for this light. For example, I will keyframe the power. You will automatically get a light action. So let's say you animated this to get a flicker animation. Of course, you don't want to do this over and over again. So what you can do is go to your other light, go to the action editor and simply select the spot action. And now it will take the animation data from the spotlight and apply it to the area light. If you use nodes like a black body, you can also add a shader node tree animation by clicking on new and then keyframing some property in the node tree. So let's say that we take the black body and we animate it to become 8000. Now it's changing from red to blue. And if we want to apply this to the area light, we can simply select the area light, go over here and select the action. It will go from red to blue. It's also possible to add a driver. So let's add one to the power. Right mouse click, add driver, and you get some properties. You can change the expression right here to control the power. Then right here we can select an object and I'm going to select the UV sphere. If you want to gain access again to the power, simply right click and open the driver's editor. If you then select the power right here, you will see all the editing properties. When we move the sphere on the X location, the light power will change. So let's select the sphere, G and X, and let's bring it closer. And as you can see, the light power increases or decreases. I coupled my driver to the stock market. Gobos are basically light textures. They give you a shadow pattern that makes things look very professional. If you want to change the scale of a gobo, all you need to do is go over here and change the scale, or add a value node, plug it in here, and change the value like this. Of course, if you increase the radius, it makes the shadow look a bit softer. IES textures only work on point lights and are basically light shapes. If you want to make gradient lighting, all you need to do is add a gradient texture, bring it over here, color into the strength, and then you can add a map range node in between to control how far it goes. You can see it better if you decrease the spread. You can add HDRIs by going to the World tab and click on Color, then set it to Environment Texture right over here and open an HDRI that you've got in a folder. It's labeled as EXR, so sometimes you need to search for EXR. This helps getting some light and cool reflections from all sides. If you want to blur the HDRI, all you need to do is add in a texture coordinate node, add a mix color node, set it to subtract, generate it into A, then add a noise texture, color into B, and then the subtract goes into the factor. For this image right here, I use the factor of 0.06 and a scale of 10,000 on the noise texture. Instead of using an HDRI, you can also add a sky texture. So instead of environment texture, let's go over here and select sky texture. The sky texture has different properties, so we can increase the sun size, for example, or decrease the sun size. Let's make sure that we have some air first, so you can actually see the sun. Nishita is the newest sky texture. I wouldn't actually recommend using any of the other ones, so simply stick with Nishita. The other ones are older and have less settings. What I often like to do is decrease the air by a lot, keep it a bit more blue by having a higher ozone, and then we can also see the sun, which we can blur in compositing, and then the dust should be based on however your render looks. To be honest, most of the times it's just playing around until you get something cool. If you want to control your light with empties, all you need to do is go over to the Objects Constraint tab, click on Track To, select the object you want your light to track towards, and now all we need to do is duplicate this, duplicate this, then add an empty, Shift A, empty plane axis for example. Take the lights that you've just created and parent it to the empty. Ctrl P, keep transform, and now when you rotate the empty or move the empty, the lights will always be facing the object. The 3-point lighting setup looks like this. There is a key light right over here, which is the main light source for the object. Then we have a rim light directly to the opposite side, which gives a glow to the edges of the back of the model. And then we have a soft light right here, which is filling in some of those shadows. Side lighting is whenever lights come from two sides. If you want to add some cool atmospheric effects, simply add some fogs by bringing in a principled volume, setting the density quite low, and bringing a light behind the object. If you want to create God rays, simply bring in an area light, set it above the fog, use nodes, bring in a Voronoi texture and add it to the strength. Increase the power and decrease the spread. Now increase the scale on the Voronoi texture or decrease it to get the desired result. If you want to make it more pronounced, simply add in a color ramp and bring those closer to each other. Play around with the color and the settings and you'll be able to get something like this. Now I personally don't use Eevee very much, but I've set this scene to Eevee without ray tracing. I'm going to add a light probe. Light probe volume, bring it right over here. And if you then click on this little button right here, we get some probe settings. If you bake the light cache, you can see that the lighting just changed. And if I now remove it, you can see something in the shadows changed. This is supposed to make your lighting a little bit more realistic if you're not using ray tracing. But since Eevee Next has ray tracing right over here, there really isn't that much reason to use those probes anymore. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. If you want to increase realism in a scene, always use bevel. Right now we have a hard cutoff of the light right here, which means that the shadow is very sharp. But if we add a bevel, it is kind of smoothing over into the shadow. You can see it even better from this side if I turn on the bevel. In the render settings, if you want maximum quality, go to light paths and click on the presets button right here and choose full global illumination. Of course, if you don't have any transparent objects, you can basically set this to 0 and it won't matter anything. We also don't have volumes, so we can turn that off. Usually you don't play around with the clamping settings, but if you are having problems with fireflies, which are those little white dots in your render, you can play around with these settings in order to get rid of them. Fast GI approximation is basically a fast global illumination approximation, which means that if you click this button, it will perform less indirect light calculations and make your render a lot faster. However, this does come at the cost of quality. Finally, in the render settings, if we go all the way down, we get color management. And right here we can change the exposure in order to brighten the entire image. Or we can increase the gamma, which basically just brightens the midtones. As you can see, if I turn the gamma up to its maximum, we still get those dark areas and those very white areas. But if we place this down and increase the exposure, basically everything becomes white and black. And then finally we have curves, which is over here. And if you turn that on, you can increase or decrease the brightness, make it a lot more contrasty, stuff like that. But I actually recommend doing this in a dedicated software. You can also change the white balance right over here. And if you play around with the white balance, it will change its color towards something that looks a bit more blue or whatever you would like. You can also increase or decrease the tint to give it a different type of color, like greenish or purplish, and this all depends on the temperature and tint which work together. I would recommend just getting your render to look like this by using the right colors, but if you're really already done and you don't want to change everything, you can try and play around with these sliders. And finally, if you have a robot like this and you want to render the emissive materials in a different way, no problem, you can simply go over here, scroll down, select emission and render this image. When the render is done, you can go over here and you can already see that you have the emission layers separated. So all we need to do now is composite this. Let's click on compositing, use nodes, Ctrl-Shift-click in order to see your image. And then we're going to add a mix color node, mix color right over here. And from the emit, we want to add a glare. The emit can go into the image. And let's preview this. Of course, we have several different presets, such as bloom or ghosts, but I like to use bloom or fog glow. I'm going for bloom right now. I will decrease the mix in order to make it less powerful, and I will decrease the size to make it a little bit more in its own area. Then we're going to plug this into the image, and if we set this to add and click on this, then now we will be able to see that the eyes have their glow. So this is the before and this is the after. And that's just an easy way to render emission in Blender. Click on subscribe and watch this video next. Let's learn how to light products. First, we're going to do the simple stuff. We're going to light a product in 2 different ways that always look good. And then I'll show you how problematic glass can be and how to solve that problem so that you always get the best lighting on objects with glass. And finally, I'll show you how to deal with ugly looking lights in reflections. So there's some simple stuff, there's some higher level stuff, and if you follow this video, you will be ready for any lighting endeavor. Let's get started straight away. So this product is pretty much the same all over. It has the same colors and it's not very reflective. This gives us the freedom to light in whatever fashion we would like and get some basics down. Right now we'll show you 3 different lighting setups and I'm wondering which one you think is best. So this is basically what we start out with. We have this gray scene and we are going to the World Properties tab and going to set this background to 0 because I don't like this grayish tone. We can better work with the lights without all this extra HDRI type soft lighting. So let's light this with an area light and let's bring it over here. First, increase the power and now we can see the model. This is what it looks like. This is probably not going to make people very happy. And the way that we're going to fix that is simply by going over here and placing this light on this side. I'm going to look at it from the camera and now we get a cool rim light. And the rim light's helping separate this from the background. So if we increase or decrease the power, we can see what this does. Now, on the other side, this is completely dark, so we don't want that. We actually want this to have some light as well. So let's copy this. Let's see, let's place it right over there. So if we look at it, I'm going to scale it down just a little bit and increase the power. Maybe it should be pointing a little bit more towards the side and less towards the middle, something like this. Somewhere over here we can find a good rotation where we get this cool light streak, and now this looks pretty cool. The rim light should usually be just a little area and not too much, otherwise it will light it very flatly. Let's just bring it towards the back and now we get some cool separation on this side and that side all at the same time. We could decrease this and maybe scale it upwards simply to get this light only on this area. And that looks pretty cool already, but now we have some shadows that we need to get rid of because we actually can't see anything right over there. So what I'm going to do, simply select this light, duplicate it, and let's place one right over there as well. And this one should be a little bit bigger because it's only supposed to fill in the shadows and it should be soft. So if you make it very small, something like this, it will be pretty harsh. But if we just make it a little bit bigger, we get some soft shadows right there. And we can also decrease the power just to fill it in a bit. So this would be too much. We're gonna fill it in maybe somewhere like over here. That would be pretty cool. And now I feel like this part is still too dark because this one is a bit too much to the side. This area stays dark. So let's bring this a little bit more over there in order to fill in that shadow. And now we've got a 3-point lighting setup. So this one is the key light, this is the rim light on the background, and this is the soft light filling in the shadows. So this is a very simple technique that you can always use to light products. But of course, there are some things that we can do. We can increase this in order to make this go onto the top as well. So that would look pretty cool. We can also scale it upwards. So it's bringing in some light on the sides, but I'm not going to do that in this case. I like the separation it's bringing right now. So in order to make this lighting setup a little bit more interesting, let's also bring in a plane. Let's E this upward. Let's bevel this. Let's shade this smooth. And now we have a very boring white background. And that is great actually. So now I'm going to press on new, add a new material. Perhaps we can make this black. That already looks pretty cool, but I like to have a little bit more control. So if you want to have the product lit in a different way than the background, we can definitely do that simply by selecting all of these lights and adding light linking to it. Now you can add light linking in whatever fashion you would like. I'm going to bring this into a collection called light linking. If you want to know how to do this, simply select a light, go over to the object properties, go to shading, light linking, press on new, and then you drag in the collection of your object or your object itself, and then the light linking will work on that. I'm going to use Lumio simply because it's a bit faster. I'm going to select the light linking group and the microphone full, add light linking. Now we have light linking on this object and it's not working on the background anymore. But if we add a new light right over here and increase its power, and now we can get some type of gradient going on here. Basically 2 things that we can do. We can either just use a area light for this and move it on the y-axis, get the gradient to look exactly like we want it to. And I think this is pretty cool, just rotate it around a bit to get this type of effect. And what we can also do is remove this. Let's bring in a point light, bring it right over there. And let's add an IES texture. So I've added this right now. It's a little bit soft, so I'm going to increase the power. And now we get this cool type of showcase effect going on here. Now, if you want to add a IES texture, you can simply go into the shader editor, use nodes, add an IES texture. It's a node like IES texture, and then bring in your IES texture from external folder, go get it. So then you get IES textures, and you can play around with these and find the one that you like best. What we can also do in order to make this a better render is add a mesh, add a cube. Let's go to the shader editor. Let's delete this principled BSDF and add in a principled volume. Volume into the volume, density 2.02 to make it a little bit less dense. And then we can add a light spotlight, and then we can add a gobo. So if you click on use nodes, you can add an image texture and you can add your gobo if you have one, or you can make one real quickly simply by adding in a Voronoi texture, adding this to the strength and bringing these together until you get to the desired result. Of course, you need to increase the power and then increase the contrast in order to get some type of God ray effect. Now, I'm not going to show you exactly how this works. I've got an entire tutorial on that. So Gobo browser, I'm going to apply this preset, and now we get some cool God rays, and you can have them come in from the side like this, which always looks cool, or you can undo the rotation and bring it exactly towards the middle. So we have one light streak going behind this and some more over there. And if you increase the radius, it will become a bit more soft, which also looks very cool. So in a matter of seconds, you've learned how to make a 3-point lighting setup. You've learned how to add 3 types of different backgrounds in order to make it better. And I will now show you another way to light this product. So I'll delete everything and start anew. So let's bring in an area light, rotate this on the y-axis. Let's make sure that the scale is a little bit bigger. Let's bring this towards the side and let's increase the power. Very good. And now we can do the same for the other side, RZ 180, and make sure that it's lit like this. And I think it's a bit too soft. So what we can do is simply decrease the spread just a little bit and then rotate it away until we get those cool lines on the sides. Do the same for this one. Very cool. Then we're going to add another light, undo the rotation, RX 90, make this one a little bit bigger. And now it's filling in the shadows as well if we turn this off. So this is also a way to light a product, and the finishing touch on this one is actually to add a new area light. And the final light I'm going to bring right over here, Alt R, it's going to be on the top. Scale it down, should be a bit harder. So increase the power, bring it towards the middle, and we can scale it and look at the reflection in there. So the smaller it becomes, the harder the reflection will be, which in this case I like. So we can also scale it on the x-axis, something like this, increase or decrease the power. I think this looks pretty good. Once again, you can use light linking in order to separate it from the background and do whatever you would like with this. But this is basically the entire setup. So this is lighting setup number 1. And this is lighting setup number 2. Let me know which one you like best, and let's continue to the next product. So right here I have a light, and well, it's a light model actually, and it looks like this. Let's first turn on the world lighting. Pretty uninteresting looking, to be honest, and we have to make sure that this looks good. So let's set this to 0 once again. I'm going to bring in a background first. So let's bring in a background like this. Let's select the back and bring that upwards. Select this area, Control B, and let's give this a bevel. Auto smooth, so now we actually have a background to work with. Now in the case of glass, it is quite hard to make it look very good, because as you can see already with this light, it's creating some very harsh and uninteresting looking shadows, and it's not really the best shape to use. So one of the things that we can do is set this to a disc. This already looks a bit more natural. Why? Well, most natural lights are in square. If you think about it, there really aren't any square lights except for those that are man-made. So it immediately gives this sense of artificialness if you use a square light and you can see it in the reflections. One of the things that we can do is simply place a light somewhere over there. Now let's add another area light, and let's RX, RY 90. Let's bring it to the side. And one of the things that I like doing is simply going into the shader editor, to the glass material. Let's forget about all of that. And we can play around with the IOR and the roughness. We can play around with this until we get to the desired result. I actually recommend doing this with glass. I mean, throw physics out of the window, I know, but it's simply sometimes better to do that to get a better looking result. Now, one of the ways to really improve the lighting of a glass object is to add in an HDRI, which I'm going to do. So let's add one. Now this already looks a lot better. We can try different ones. We can see quite a lot of the HDRI in this. So we can tackle that by increasing the roughness and making it a bit more like this, but it's also becoming quite hazy and I don't really like that. So we really want to keep it like this. But if we want to blur this HDRI, all we need to do is go to the shader editor, go to the world, and then right here, let's make a small little setup on this side. Let's remove the HDRI mapping. The generated can go into a mix color. Then we can use a noise texture. Noise texture generated into the vector and generated into, I believe it is the A. And then the color into B. This can be set to subtract. Subtract result in the vector. Increase the scale by a lot. And then let's play around with this. Increase it to 10,000. So yeah, we pretty much blurred this entire HDRI. If you bring it back, it will be less blurred. So let's blur it all the way. And use a better HDRI, like a city, for example. And of course we have our area light, which we can play around with like this. Basically turn it around. And now we get this weird looking reflection on the side. Bring it maybe somewhere over there. 3. Until we get this cool little small streak going on here. And of course a light from the top. All are. And now this is making a little bit more sense. Go into the camera, viewport display, passepartout all the way up. And of course we can remove this by adding light linking. I'm not going to show that all the time. Maybe we can add a light inside. Maybe that would be funny. So let's add a little point light, increase the radius. Let's give it a bit of an orangey color. And now let's go back into the material, to the object, play around with the IOR until we get something that looks pretty good. Something like this. Now I don't like the way this looks right here. So let's go over into that area light. I believe it is this one. Decrease the size. And let's increase it on the Z-axis like this. And basically it's just a game of trying to get accurate looking reflections. Now I don't like the circular one anymore. I think it's a bit too much. It's just throwing too much in there. So we should make it smaller and maybe even scale it up in a way that is disproportionate. And what I mean by that is that I'm scaling this ellipse in order to get a different shape. Now we are starting to get to the point where I'm like, yeah, this looks kind of good. And since we changed the HDR texture, we probably should add the same setup again. So before it looks like this, which of course is way too much. But if we blur the HDRI, we can get to a place where it actually looks kind of decent. Now we can also remove the plane, bring a light right behind it. Scale this up until we get this cool light all around and then just decrease the spread until we get something that looks like this. So we can still see the edges and we can also do that on the top simply by rotating it around a bit. We can give this plane whatever color we would like. Now one thing you could try to do if you want to have a colored background like this, but you don't like the fact that it's having too much impact in the glass itself, is simply adding a light pad node. Light pad node on the floor, by the way. So let's select the floor, light pad node. And then we are going into the principled BSDF. Let's make this white again, saturation down. Control 0 to add a mix shader. And now let's try different of these rays. So the camera ray already works. So now we have this white reflection instead of the blue reflection. So with the is-camera array, we can make sure that we get another type of reflection in this glass despite the background material. Of course, if you want to make it blue, but it should be a different type of blue, you can also do that. So let's say that the background is black. Simply set it to black and then increase it until we get to a point where we're like, all right, that's pretty cool. Now, as you can see, this is quite a bit more difficult to get right than the other shot, because that one uses a very rough material. It's very easy to light that. But when you're dealing with glass, at least these are some tricks that you can use. So we've blurred an HDRI, we've played around with the light pad node in order to get different type of reflections in the glass if we would like that. And we also changed the light shapes accordingly. So let's turn off some lights one by one. I think the one in the back was maybe a bit too much. Something like this feels a bit better to me. And if we really want to get that highlight on the back, what we can also do is go into this material, then go to sheen, add the weight and decrease the roughness. And now we get this little edge highlight around this part. And we can decide what color it is right here. And we can also do that for the glass naturally. So go over to the sheen. So if you want to do that for this light as well, on the glass we can add another setup, which is the light path node with a ray depth into an add matte node. This goes into the factor of the mix shader, which is being driven by a transparent BSDF in the top one and a principled BSDF with a roughness very low, an IOR that you decided yourself, and the transmission all the way up. If we then want to add some sheen, we can definitely do that. Add the weight, decrease the roughness, and now we get that cool edge highlight for our glass as well, if we want to do that without getting ugly reflections. So now you've learned 4 special techniques in order to light glass more accurately. You can change the shape of the light, you can blur HDRIs, you can add sheen by using this type of glow effect, which is basically like some sort of Fresnel. And we also had a look at how you can change reflections of the material that it is reflecting from. So those are 4 high-level techniques that you can use in order to manipulate your glass to look better. So let's go on to the third one. So I've got this Rolex right here, and I will turn off this collection so you can actually see what I'm going to do. So right here, area light, let's bring this upwards. So you can see that this area light is bringing in quite some harsh reflections right here. And this is a problem that you will run into more often when you have reflective surfaces. You will really see this type of lighting in the reflection. And of course you can play around with it until it kind of disappears, and that really doesn't give you that much control over your lighting. So what I like to do is actually bring in a gradient, and then I will first show you and then I'll show you how the gradient works. You can play around with these settings in order. So now it's quite harsh like this, but if you play around with this, you can make it feather over the reflection, and in this way you have more control over the way the light looks. So that's actually what we're trying to achieve. Now the way this works is actually relatively simple. It is a gradient texture, and the gradient texture is being driven by a map range node. The map range is going into an emission, and the transparent is going into the mix shader. So let's bring in a plane, for example. Let's bring in a gradient. Basically, if we now play around with this, we are determining how far this line is going. So if you have reflective surfaces and you're running into a problem where basically it looks like this harsh line, which you definitely don't want, then simply use a gradient in order to get rid of it. All right, something like this, and that will make for a much better shadow. Also, one other thing that you might not want to do oftentimes is light from the bottom. Let me show you what I mean. And the reason for that is basically because we are used to seeing things like this, because light oftentimes comes from the top. Your light in your room is probably coming from the top. The light even on the dinner table is being hung on ropes to get this light above your table. Rarely ever do you place a small light on the floor. Lights also get hung up on walls, for example. The sun doesn't shine from beneath, the lamps don't shine from beneath, so most of the times you want to avoid lighting something from the bottom. I've placed quite a bit of effort creating all the free courses that are available on this channel, which are around 5 now, I believe. I was simply hoping that maybe you can check out some of the things that I created, such as Auto Animate or the King of Light bundle pack. And maybe if that's something for you, you can help me as a creator by supporting yourself. Thanks for watching, and you definitely don't want to miss the next one, which is going to unveil all the secrets about photorealism. So, see you there. This is a render I made 4 or 5 years ago, and it's called Sand Planet. Lately, I've been wondering if I can make my renders better than I did years ago. So I created this render based on the other one. It's called Robot Left His Hometown. I also tried it with this render and made this. Now, I'm not the ultimate master of photorealism, but throughout the years I've learned a lot of tricks and techniques that will make your render better. And I promise you that if you follow this video and use these 33 proven techniques, that your next render will be so much better, you'll be amazed. So the way this mini course video is structured is as follows. First, we'll do a little bit of composition. Then we're going to look at best practices in modeling and texturing. And after that we are going over some lighting and compositing tricks, and finally some things about animation and some smaller details that didn't fit in the categories. Oh, and by the way, all the things you've seen in this video thus far is 3D. The microphone, the silver YouTube play button, which unfortunately I don't have, so please subscribe, and all the other stuff. I hope I tricked you, because now you have to watch this video all the way until the end.
And that was my evil plan all along. So let's get started.
Composition. Under this category fall the best practices we use to make a shot look more cinematic. Of course, in art all rules may be broken, but keep in mind that beginners like to break everything and therefore create objectively bad art. In order to avoid making those mistakes, we need to learn about composition. There's a person standing here and a person standing there. There's an object on the left and there's an object on the right. It's so popular that you can see it everywhere you look. Apparently we like this type of ratio when placing objects within a rectangle. It's called the rule of thirds. If you want to improve the composition of your render, keep it simple and place your objects on the thirds. But there's also another rule that had mathematicians panties in a bunch and can help create better and cinematic shots. You've probably seen this image before. It's actually a mathematical phenomenon that manifests in nature, and humans have used it to create lots of things with it as well, such as the Parthenon, the Vitruvian Man, and now even on our screens. It's called the golden ratio. Click on the camera in cycles and then open the viewport display, composition guides, and select any ratio. This is also true for the thirds, by the way. And now that we understand some basics of composition on where to place our objects or characters, now it's time to really implement a trick that immediately increases the quality of your renders. Everything you're not focusing on is out of focus. Even now your eyes are picking up things in the peripheral view that are kind of blurred. We use the same effect by using depth of field in the lens, and it helps guiding the viewer towards what we want them to see. And luckily, it looks cinematic as well. Here you can see a comparison. If you want to do this as well, simply go into the camera of Blender, click on the box called depth of field and play around with the f-stop in order to get to the desired result. You can pick an object that you want to be in focus. Oftentimes a render might be too chaotic, leaving a viewer with wandering eyes. In order to guide people towards the correct places, we can carefully construct lines that point at what we want them to see. These are called guiding lines, and they help give the composition more order and guidance. This object is out of focus, the hero is in focus, and the background is out of focus. The 3-layer strategy basically divides everything into a foreground, a hero element, and a background. Kind of like a hamburger, because a burger is obviously the hero and the buns and lettuce are kind of there to add to it. If your render doesn't look cinematic enough, simply place a foreground element and make sure that the background is out of focus. More on that later, but first let's see how we can tell a story on the screen in a single image. Now there are actually countless rules for visual storytelling, but here are a couple. When shot from below you can be perceived as powerful. When shot from above you can be seen as weak. So in order to understand storytelling just a little bit better, let's have a look at this robot render. What if the city was in smoke? Then the robot's home maybe got destroyed. But what if he was turned around, looking down on the city he's about to conquer? Add a little sword and now it's a different story. You can play around with different elements in order to create stories. Think about attributes, subject placement, directions, and even emotion. You'll be amazed at what kind of stories you can tell by simply taking these small things into consideration. So in this chapter you learned how to use the rule of thirds, what the golden ratio is, how to add depth of field in Blender, what guiding lines are, how to separate your layers using the 3-layer strategy, and how to tell a story. For the next part we need to look at what you can do with your models and your textures to make it as realistic as paying taxes. Models and texturing. 9 out of 10 times you want your models to replicate the exact size they have in real life. So if you're making an architectural render, don't simply make a gigantic couch, actually make it to scale so it fits in any scene. Not only does this help normalizing workflows in Blender for other 3D artists, it also helps in creating an accurate looking shot and improving the bokeh to look like a real world camera. If objects are too big, for example, you really have to crank down this value in order to get some type of blur effect, which makes sense because the distance is way off due to the size. Always try to create things in the correct scale, with some exceptions such as in simulations, which are better calculated in Blender if you don't do it in scale. scale, or if you want to make it an artistic choice. Now this one I'm going to keep short and simple. Nothing in real life is perfectly sharp, which is why I recommend always adding bezels. You can either use a modifier or use Ctrl B. Now this next one is pretty easy, but it's also very important. It's 10 times harder to make something that is very clean and symmetrical look photoreal. So if you're working on a scene, simply play around with the rotations or the location or the scale and everything that you can come up with to randomize it a little bit. It actually works sometimes to make an image more chaotic because it forces them to look at it holistically. But randomization is simply not enough. So here are 4 more things that you can do with your models and textures to make it look better. Oftentimes when striving for photorealism, you want to add some edge wear, which means that the object's actually being used. There are multiple ways to achieve this in Blender. You can do it with procedural texturing, you can do it with texture painting, you can do it with a PBR. The possibilities are quite endless. And while you're working on your edges anyway, it's also a great practice to add some surface imperfections. Simply rough it up a little with proportional editing or in sculpt mode. Why? Well, because it makes sense that an object doesn't really have perfect geometry. And the same goes for textures, which is why you want to add texture variation. Think about a slight roughness variation, which you often use on products, for example, or think about some rust and slight color variations here and there. This really helps sell the idea that this is an actual object. Now the next one is quite important as well, and is often overlooked. Because most objects live in an environment, they also have an air or a type of space or some type of grime. So what you really want to add is some dirt or dust. And if you want to add some dirt to the crevices, simply use the ambient occlusion node. When you plug it in and play around with the sliders, you can see that it usually gravitates towards the crevices. Now from there on out you can use it as a mask, or you can multiply it with a noise texture in order to give it some more variation, stuff like that. But what you can also use to make your render look more realistic are decals. This is just an image texture that you can get from textures.com, for example, or you can make them yourself simply by photographing things on the street and then cutting them out by yourself, and then you can spread it out over the scene to create graffiti, dirt, grime, whatever you need. So using decals is a very easy cheat to make your render look better. So in this part you've learned how to use correct scaling for realistic outcomes, that you always need to add bezels, should prefer to randomize everything in the scene, create edge wear for increased realism, add some surface imperfections, use texture variations, even for simple colored textures, add some dirt and dust to crevices or objects to make it seem more embedded in an environment, and finally add decals to easily increase the details in your render. In the next part we're going to look at some lighting and compositing effects, and this is where it will really shine. You can either do it in Blender or any compositing program of choice. I'll be using DaVinci Resolve, but it is possible to achieve whatever I'm about to tell in any compositing or editing program. As we all know, lighting can really make or break a scene. A very simple way to create a very cinematic lighting look is by placing the light behind an object. If you light from the front, it quickly becomes flat, but lighting from the back actually creates some more depth and shadow, which makes it more cinematic. So when in doubt, always light from the back first. And now let's look at the next one. Haze is not only used in 3D renders, it's also used in real life. In this way you can easily create some more depth and light bloom and some other cool effects. It's very simple to make atmospheric haze in Blender. Simply use the principled volume, plug the volume into the volume, and if you want a little bit more variation, all you have to do is plug a noise texture into the density and play around with the color ramp in between to get some more cloudy-like feelings. Cloudy-like feelings, guys. We texture our objects, so why not our lights as well? It simply upgrades the quality with so much ease, it should be illegal. What's also illegal is the King of Light bundle pack, which is the all-in-one lighting solution in Blender. Link is in the description if you'd like to check it out. Filmmakers often just throw water on the ground. Not like that, but more like this. I really don't know why it looks so cool, but it certainly does. So adding some reflections, some water or other reflective materials in your scene can really add to it. But another awesome effect is the next one. Bokeh comes in different shapes and sizes depending on the lens you use. Basically you don't want something to simply be blurred, you want it to be blurred like a lens would do it. Blender luckily kinda does this automatically, but you can change some of these sliders in order to manipulate it. But of course that's not the only lens effect, because the next one is really important to add after your render is done. All lenses have curvature, which means that light bends in all different directions on different areas of that lens. This causes a phenomenon called lens distortion. I think it's a pretty good practice to add lens distortion to your renders. In DaVinci Resolve Fusion, I just add a lens distortion node like this and then distort it ever so slightly. Then lightly zoom it back in using a transform node, light that enters on the side of a lens is a little bit less intense, which causes the corners to darken a bit. This is called a vignette. And the backstory of vignette is actually pretty interesting. In 17th century books, people often added drawings to the sides of the text. Now these drawings often look like grapevines, which isn't a big surprise because it was made by the French. And because they look like vines, now for us it is called a vignette. Now in DaVinci Resolve's color page you have a node that does this for you. Simply add the vignette node, increase the size, increase the softness, and then decrease the global blend. Halation is the glowing or bleeding of bright lights into darker parts of the image. Once again, DaVinci Resolve has an halation node that you can play around with to achieve this effect. Chromatic aberration is when a lens fails to focus all colors of light into the same point. This causes color fringes, usually appearing around the edges of objects. In DaVinci Resolve Fusion, you have to add a prism blur, decrease the slider right here, increase the strength to max, and then decrease the distance until you have a very subtle chromatic aberration. This next one is an effect that you really don't want to overdo. It's glow and bloom. This effect happens around light sources that spill some light into surrounding areas. I think that light right over there is an example. Maybe if I do this, you can see, I don't know. In the previous video, which is probably called something like the Ultimate Lighting Guide, I go in depth on how to composite this in Blender. Now we've spoken about reflections before, but there's also a different type of reflection, namely one that occurs in the lens. It is appropriately called lens reflection. Lens reflections happen due to light bounces within the lens, and they can create some type of blurs. Now, there's two things that you can do. You can either go into DaVinci Resolve and add the lens reflections node, which is pretty good in and of itself. But what you can also do is go online to YouTube, find some black screens with bokeh light leaks or lens reflections, and then you can place that on top of your footage, set it to screen, and then it will be visible. And then all you need to do is decrease the opacity in order to make it less extreme. And while we're on the topic of adding things to your footage, the next one is an oldie but goldie. Don't you hate noise? Well, digital noise is kind of annoying, but film grain, as it is called, actually adds to the realism of your scene. It really does have its charm. So, what have we learned? Not all noise is bad noise, except for this noise. You have a film grain node in DaVinci Resolve to add as the final node in your sequence. Choose a preset and increase the grain strength. Little side tip, but when integrating CG elements with real footage, you want to take extra care to match the noise patterns. Ask yourself this: is your lens spotless? Most lenses catch dirt and dust when you are outside, and if it's too much, it can really ruin your shot. However, when used carefully, it can add an extra sense of realism. Simply search for some lens dirt elements online and place them on top of your footage, set it to screen, decrease the opacity. We've seen it all before. It's a very small but useful effect. This one's quite obvious, but when you're integrating CG in the real world, it's best to have accurate reflections. Enter HDRIs. These are basically 360-degree images that provide accurate reflections from all around the model. There are apps on the App Store or Play Store that you can download to make some 360 photos for yourself, or you can get a dedicated product in order to make it work, something like an Insta360 for example. In this part, you learned how to light objects cinematically, add haze for more depth, use gobos or light textures to increase realism easily, use reflections to create a more interesting shot, add bokeh for realistic lens blur effects, use lens distortion to mimic real light bending in a lens, add vignetting for that soft touch of darkness in the corners, add halation to replicate old camera effects in your lights, use chromatic aberration for a small but significant extra touch, add a little bit of bloom to your light sources, use reflections to make CG seem to fit better into a scene, add film grain to emulate old film effects, make use of lens dirt because nothing is spotless, and finally use HDRIs to incorporate realistic reflections. In the next part I still have 5 different things that I couldn't place in a specific category, so here it goes. For animations, motion blur is mandatory and there's no negotiating this. If you want to make your animation seem less CG, turn on motion blur. Another important thing to know is how to use realistic camera movements. If you stick with camera moves that a real cameraman can make, then that will improve the photorealism of your render. For stylized renders, such as in anime, this obviously doesn't matter. If you want the easiest way to make your renders look a little bit more realistic, simply add some handheld movement to your camera, instead of having it just stand still or move very robotically. You've probably seen this effect before in a movie. It's called a rack focus effect. You first have an object out of focus in the background, and then you just simply shift the focus, so now it is in focus. This changes the depth perspective, and to me looks very cool. You can add an empty, and under depth of field select the empty as the object, and then you can simply animate the empty in order to make it seem like a rack focus effect. And the next one is sound design. Personally, I'm very bad at sound design, but it really does add a lot to your scene. And now the final one, which is simply color grading. Color grading is a great way, especially for beginners, to make your render just a little bit better. From stronger contrast, better color separation, and manipulation of different areas in the image in general. I got an entire video where I break down the entire process of color grading in DaVinci Resolve, so if you want, you can check that out. So in this part you have learned that motion blur is very important for moving renders, that camera movement should be grounded to increase the perception of realism, how to use the rack focus effect to create a cool cinematic shot, how sound design adds to the overall experience of a render, and finally that you should use some color grading techniques to boost the quality of your renders. I hope you've learned a lot in this tutorial and that your next render will look 10 times better than what you're used to. If so, please leave a comment and of course subscribe. And if you want to, I also have an entire checklist with all of these elements for free on Gumroad. So if you want to know more about lighting, I highly recommend watching one of these videos next. I'm going to show you a technique that makes your renders better in less than 1 minute without any effort. So let's get started straight away. So I'm in DaVinci Resolve right now. This is the render. I'm going into the color tab, which is right here. It looks like a little color palette. I'm going to press on Alt S. I will open the effects and I will type Film Look Creator. And if we drag this on here, look what happens. This is what it looks like right now. But of course, there are different presets. So if we select a preset right here, such as cinematic, then we already have a very interesting looking render. So this is what we started out with. And now we have this, and that cost only 5 seconds. Of course, there are different presets. I think Rochester here looks pretty good, and we can play around with the slider. So you can increase the exposure, the contrast, the highlights, the white balance. We've got an orange and teal split tone right here. So if you change the amount, it's going to make it a bit more extreme. And I've went over all of these other things in the previous video, the 33 photorealism video. So I highly recommend checking that out. But look at what this does in only 5 seconds. So let's apply this to some other renders as well. So right over here, looks pretty cool. Light over here also looks pretty cool. Of course, you can tweak all of the settings, bring it on this one, cinematic instantly, and this one as well, a lot better. So look at the before and afters on this. And naturally you can play around with all of these sliders. But that's basically what I wanted to show you. This single node in DaVinci Resolve will improve your renders. Of course, there are a couple of other steps that you can take in order to make it even better, such as the lens distortion, lens reflections, lens dirt, stuff like that. If you haven't watched any of the other videos in this free course, then I highly recommend doing that simply by clicking on this channel. Also, I would appreciate it if you subscribed and watch this video next. Now, to be fully transparent, this video is an advertisement for the King of Light bundle pack. But I truly believe that this will be valuable for you, so I will try to tell everything in less than 1 minute. First of all, we have 365 gobos. There's trees, plants, some stuff you've never seen before but can be useful, and procedural gobos that you can tweak yourself, such as this caustic setup. Gobos are just an easy way to add render quality in less than 20 seconds. And then we have Lumio. This is a complete overhaul of Blender's lighting system. Some small examples are switching light collections, moving lights around more intuitively with your mouse, as well as changing parameters from the viewport without switching through different tabs, presets, light painting, gradient lighting, and more. I really believe Lumio is almost perfect and it really helps enhance your lighting experience in Blender. Finally, we have Geolights Pro, which is a geometry nodes lighting solution. It allows you to change lights separately with sliders from one place. It's great for testing different lighting setups faster and works well for simple scenes. So one more time, that's 365 gobos. It's Lumio, the complete lighting overhaul of Blender, and we have the geometry node solution called Geolights Pro. If you want more information, you can click on the links in the description. It's on Gumroad, it's on Blendermarket, and it's on Patreon. So if you want to support me as a creator or simply get a great tool for everything lighting related, then check it out. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this entire free lighting course. If you did, I would appreciate it if you subscribed. Check out some of the products that I've got in the description, and that would help me as a creator as well. And of course, if you haven't seen any of the other free courses on this channel yet, I highly recommend checking that out as well. And you can start right here by watching one of these videos.